The alarm was already ringing when I kicked the back door open. Red lights spun across wet crates and metal walls. Somewhere down the hall, a man was shouting numbers into a comm unit, and I understood exactly what those numbers meant. 10 minutes. Maybe less. Then the collection truck would arrive, and everything in this room would be gone forever. I did not plan this. I want to be honest about that from the start. 20 minutes earlier, I had only wanted a drink after a long shift at the docking bay. I had walked past this building 100 times without knowing what happened inside it. Then I heard the sound. A thin, trembling cry, dozens of small voices crying together, and something in my chest turned cold and hard, the same way it used to turn when I heard a distress signal on the battlefield. I am not a young man anymore. 22 years in the colonial force left me with a bad knee, a quiet apartment, and a habit of running toward trouble instead of away from it. That habit is what carried me through that door. Inside, the room was full of crates, stacked 3 high, each one holding a small dragon hatchling. Their scales were dull and cold. Their wings were folded tight against their bodies, some crooked, some too short, some marked with patterns the workers clearly did not like. I did not need anyone to explain what was about to happen to them. The smell of ash in the air told me enough. A woman in a stained apron turned around fast when she saw me. Her name tag read Nora. She looked more tired than alarmed, like she had seen strangers wander in before and simply did not care anymore. "You should not be here," she said. Her voice was flat, almost bored. "This area is restricted." "I heard them crying," I said, "from the street." She glanced at the crates, then back at me, and something behind her eyes softened for just a moment. "They cry because they know. Hatchlings always know." "Know what?" "That the truck is coming." She said it the way someone might describe the weather. "These ones did not pass inspection. Wrong wingspan, wrong color, weak flame glands. Nobody wants them." I felt my jaw tighten. "So you burn them." "It is not my decision." She looked away. "It is faster this way, Kinder, some say." I did not agree with that, and I told her so. Then I asked the only question that mattered. How much to stop the truck from taking them? She blinked, surprised, like nobody had ever asked her that before. She told me the salvage price per head, the number station traders used when they talked about scrap metal or broken machine parts, not living creatures. I did the math in my head. 40 hatchlings, every credit in my account, my pension backlog, even the emergency fund I had been saving in case my knee finally failed for good. All of it, gone in one transaction. I did not hesitate. 22 years of service teaches you something important, that some debts get paid before you check your balance. "Take it," I said, tapping my payment chip against the terminal she held out. "All of it. Every credit I have." Nora stared at the number on her screen, then at me, like she was trying to decide if I had lost my mind. Maybe I had, but the numbers cleared, the crates unlocked, and somewhere down the hallway that timer was still counting toward 0. "You have 4 minutes before the truck arrives," she said quickly, suddenly moving faster than before. "Use the loading ramp. Go now." I did not need to be told twice. I grabbed the nearest cart, a rusted repulsor sled meant for hauling supply boxes, and started stacking crates onto it as fast as my knee would allow. The hatchlings shrieked and clawed at the wood, terrified by the noise and the movement, but I kept loading, crate after crate, sweat mixing with the light rain that had begun to fall through the open loading door. 2 minutes left. I could hear the truck now, its engine grinding somewhere out on the access road. I pushed the sled through the ramp, out into the alley, my boots slipping on wet metal grating. 40 hatchlings screamed behind me in a chorus of fear, and I ran, actually ran, my bad knee burning with every step, pulling that overloaded sled through narrow station corridors, while security lights swept past overhead. I made it around the corner just as the collection truck rolled up to the now empty depot behind me. I did not stop moving until I reached my apartment building 3 blocks away, breathless, soaked, and completely broke. I had no idea what I was about to face. The first night was chaos. I had never raised anything in my life, not even a pet, and now, I had 40 baby dragons crammed into a one-room apartment meant for a single retired soldier. They needed warmth, so I gave them every blanket I owned. They needed food, so I spent my last 11 credits on raw fish from the corner market and prayed it would be enough. They needed quiet, and quiet was the one thing I could not give them, because every few minutes, another one would wake up screaming from cold or fear or hunger. By sunrise, I had not slept at all. My apartment smelled like fish and smoke. There was a small burn mark on my only good jacket, where one hatchling, no bigger than a house cat, had accidentally let out a spark from an underdeveloped flame gland. My knee throbbed, my hands were covered in small scratches, and somehow, through all of it, I felt more awake and alive than I had in years. One of them stood out from the beginning. She was smaller than the others, with gray scales where the rest were gold, and one wing noticeably shorter than the other. She was the reason the depot had marked that whole batch as flawed in the first place, or so I would learn later. She did not cry as much as the others. She just watched me, quiet and steady, from the moment I lifted her crate open. I named her Ash, because of the smoke smell still clinging to her scales that first night. The following weeks tested me in ways combat never had. I found part-time repair work in the station's cargo bay, patching hull damage for extra credits, because 40 growing hatchlings needed far more food than I had expected. I sold my service medals, one at a time, at a pawn shop near the transit hub, telling myself the memories mattered more than the metal. I learned to splint a bent wing using scrap wire and soft cloth. I learned the difference between a hungry cry and a frightened cry, and eventually the difference between a frightened cry and one that meant real danger. Word travels fast on a station as small as mine. Within 2 weeks, everyone knew what I had done. Not everyone approved. A Vossakar elder named Vaeth Ren cornered me outside the transit hub one afternoon, her expression carved from stone. The Vossakar were the species most people simply called dragons, though that was never their real name. Vaeth Ren represented an old and proud lineage, one that had practiced selective culling for generations, believing it kept their people strong. "You have disrespected 40 generations of tradition," she said, her voice low and controlled. "Those hatchlings were marked as unfit. You have interfered with a process older than your entire species." "With respect," I answered, "where I come from, we do not leave anyone behind because they were born a little different." She studied me for a long moment, clearly unused to being challenged so directly. "You do not understand our ways." "Maybe not," I said, "but I understand fear. I have seen it in soldiers before a battle, and I saw it in those hatchlings before that truck arrived. That is something every species understands the same way." She did not answer that. She simply turned and walked away, but I could tell my words had landed somewhere, even if she would never admit it. Not everyone was as composed as Vaeth Ren. Some neighbors filed noise complaints. Someone spat near my boots outside the noodle shop below my apartment. A local trader refused to sell me fish anymore, saying he did not want his business associated with what he called an unnatural mistake. I ignored all of it. I had buried friends in 3 different campaigns. A few unkind words from strangers were nothing compared to that kind of loss. Then came the night that nearly broke me. It happened almost 2 months after the rescue. Ash had grown quickly, faster than the others despite her smaller size, but one evening, she stopped eating. By midnight she was shivering, her gray scales turning pale, her breathing shallow and fast. I had no veterinary training, no medical database for Vossachkar biology, nothing but instinct and old field medic training from my service years. I checked her pulse the way I had been taught to check a wounded soldier's vitals, pressing gently along the base of her neck where I guessed the major vessels might be. Too fast, too weak. I remembered something Nora had mentioned in passing, back at the depot, about flame glands, sometimes overheating in hatchlings, that were forced to hide their fire for too long out of fear. I made a decision, with no guarantee it would work. I wrapped her in cool, damp cloth, the way we used to treat overheating recruits during desert deployments, and I sat with her through the night, speaking low and steady, the same calm voice I once used to keep panicking soldiers from making fatal mistakes under fire. Hours passed. The other hatchlings gathered close, forming a quiet circle around us, as if they understood something serious was happening. Around 4 in the morning, Ash's breathing steadied. Her scales slowly regained their color, By sunrise, she was weakly nudging my hand, asking for food again. I did not sleep that night, but I did not care. I had gotten to someone in time. That mattered more than any medal I had ever earned. News of that night somehow reached the station council, likely from a nervous neighbor who had heard the commotion through thin walls. An inspector was sent to assess what he called the situation, a stern man named Henry Combs, who clearly expected to find neglect and disorder. What he found instead was a functioning, if crowded, shelter. 40 hatchlings, healthy and growing, each one responding to my voice, each one moving in an instinctive protective formation the moment a stranger stepped through the door. Ash stood at the front of that formation, her short wing raised slightly, positioning herself between me and the inspector without any command from me at all. Combs stood very still for a long moment, taking in the scene. Then he lowered his data pad. "I came here expecting to write a citation," he admitted. "I did not expect this." "Neither did I said honestly. "Not at first." He asked quiet questions after that, not about violations, but about how I had managed it, how I had fed them, how I had learned to treat their injuries. Before leaving, he told me something I did not expect. He said the Colonial Veterans Fund had programs meant exactly for situations like mine, and that he intended to file a report recommending support rather than punishment. That report changed everything. Within a month, funding arrived that allowed me to rent an actual hangar space near the station's outer ring, far larger than my old apartment, with proper heating systems, and enough room for the hatchlings to finally stretch their wings without knocking over furniture. I hired 2 assistants, a quiet young man named Peter, who had experience with animal care, and a sharp-witted woman named Grace, who turned out to have a talent for organizing supply schedules better than I ever could. The hatchlings grew fast after that. Within a year, they were no longer hatchlings at all, but strong young dragons, each one carrying the marks that had once condemned them to death. Ash grew into her short wing rather than around it, learning to compensate with sharper turns and faster reflexes than her larger siblings. She became, without any planning on my part, something like a leader among them, the first to investigate new sounds, the first to greet visitors, the first to fly. Word of the sanctuary spread slowly at first, then quickly. Other stations began sending hatchlings marked as unfit, sometimes openly, sometimes quietly in the middle of the night, left at our hangar doors by families too ashamed to be seen, but unwilling to let their child face the incinerator barge. I never turned any of them away, not once. Vaeth Wren returned nearly 2 years after our first confrontation, older, quieter, and noticeably less certain of herself. She had come, she explained, because her own granddaughter had recently hatched with a wing malformation similar to Ash's, and for the first time in her long life, tradition alone did not feel like enough of an answer. "I do not ask for forgiveness," she said, standing awkwardly near the hangar entrance. "I ask only to understand what you understood from the beginning." I brought her inside, past dozens of young dragons who had once been marked unfit, and were now simply thriving, flying, playing, living. She watched them for a long time in silence. "They do not look flawed to me," she finally said. "They never were," I answered, "only unwanted. There is a difference." She left that day with a promise to bring her granddaughter to the sanctuary rather than send her elsewhere. It was not a full change of heart, not yet, but it was a beginning, and beginnings mattered more than perfect endings ever could. 3 years have passed since that first frantic night at the depot. My knee still aches on cold mornings, and I still keep my old medals, the few I did not sell, in a small box beside my bed, as a reminder of where all of this started. The sanctuary now houses well over 100 dragons, most of them grown, some of them raising hatchlings of their own within our walls, hatchlings who will never know what it means to be marked unfit. Ash flies patrol most mornings, circling the outer perimeter of the hangar with an ease that makes her short wing almost impossible to notice unless you know to look for it. Visitors sometimes ask why I never had it corrected through medical treatment once funding became available. I always give them the same answer. Nobody ever told her that wing was something to fix. She grew strong exactly as she was, and I refused to teach her otherwise. People still ask me sometimes why a human veteran with nothing left to his name would spend every last credit saving creatures that were not even his own species. I understand the question, but the answer has never changed for me. I spent 22 years learning that worth is not something decided by wingspan, or scale color, or any inspection checklist created by people who never bothered to look closer. I was not about to unlearn that lesson simply because the ones who needed saving happened to have wings instead of hands, and scales instead of skin. Some nights, when the hangar grows quiet and the young dragons finally settle into sleep, I stand near the entrance and watch them breathe, slow and steady, safe in a place that almost did not exist. I think about that first alarm, that first desperate run through the rain, and I understand now that it was never really about saving 40 hatchlings that night. It was about proving, to myself as much as anyone else, that some instincts never fade, no matter how many years or wars stand between who you were and who you have become. And if you ever find yourself near the outer docking ring of this station, listen closely in the early morning hours. You might hear wings overhead, dozens of them, moving in perfect formation across the sky. Somewhere near the front of that formation, flying steady despite an uneven wing, you will find Ash, leading the others exactly the way she was always meant to.